you can access them at a later stage. And we also put the PowerPoints up there as well, so you've got access to remind yourself as you're going through. So today we're talking about change of minds, or psychological perceptions. And I guess it's really, we have habits, we have ways of interacting, we have interactions with people. Some of those are successful, some of those aren't successful. But I guess we are who we are, and our behavior is within our control. Other people's behavior is not. But we can certainly influence other people's behavior by our interactions and understanding ourselves. A couple of my favorite sayings: to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom, is what Socrates said, which is really saying that know yourself, understand yourself, because that then allows you to model or view other people's behavior. Because I mean, if you look at yourself as a model of behavior and then start to view how other people are interacting and what have you, it starts to give you the answers of how they're thinking about things. So Lao Tzu said, knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom, mastering others is strength, and mastering yourself is true power. So we do have the power to be and do the best we are at any stage, and it's usually the way we interpret the world and we present and interact with it that is holding us back. So we're literally our own worst enemies. So in this session, we're going to talk about how do we perceive the world. We're going to talk about how do we change our thoughts, which thoughts are the basis of our actions, and looking at whether we're in a growth or survival mode, and then some tools to reframe your thoughts every day. So, I mean, it's a half-hour presentation, so obviously we're not going to go into enormous detail on these kind of things. So, I mean, we always encourage, if you're struggling to, I guess, move to the next level on certain areas, and you kind of having trouble kind of shifting your thinking and what have you, that's where a coach can be really handy, a coach or a mentor. And as we're going through these sessions, I mean, we'll be talking about blind spots, we'll be talking about, I guess, repetitive behavior and things that aren't always successful for you. Engaging other people to assist you through that is always very, very helpful. Trying to change your behavior just by yourself without looking at the consequences, and then talking about positive, negative, and without interacting with other people who can remind you about various things, it's quite difficult. So no man or woman is an island. So how we perceive the world, I mean, we all have what others see, and that's just our behavior, and it's the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot going down underneath that. So, I mean, right at our very base level, we have our core beliefs. We have the nature, nurture, the DNA, the way the world is to us, and what we need. And these even go back to your basic survival needs of food and shelter and water and things like that. So that's us as a base animal, if you like. Then we move on to the next stage, and we are in societies. We are a group animals. We live in societies, and all those different societies have different ideas and values and different ways of schooling, religion, early relationships. All these kind of things start to mold the person we are. Now, our brains don't have the capacity to interact with everything. And we are not continually having to work things out. So we have I guess a system where we are actually building models in our head. And those building models gives us the answer to things where we don't need to stop and rethink everything as we go through. And the input to that starts from almost when you're born. That starts to build the models and systems and beliefs you have as you're growing up, of which you solve problems moving forward in the world. As we grow and develop, then those needs that are wrapped in your values and beliefs start to guide the way you feel about things, the way you think about things, you know. And I guess your reaction to things usually starts with a feeling, and then we start to add thought to it. And then what someone else sees is that behavior. We translate our thinking and feeling about any situation through to behaviors, okay? So when you see someone's behaviors, you're really getting a picture, a window through to their base core needs and that flow that goes through there. So this whole idea about understanding how those things are in you, and then being able to translate that and look at other people and say, okay, I see this behavior, and I can start to map a little bit as to where that might be coming from, is a very, very powerful tool, especially moving into leadership and where you're influencing people, or you're part of a larger group. So this is that same model in a little bit more detail, I guess. And we all start with our life history, and we have core beliefs about ourselves. Now, if you look at cognitive behavioral therapy, they say that some of our very base core beliefs, they've summed it up in 3 words: unlovable, unworthy, and helpless. That if you're I guess that they are triggered at early stages, and you start to have those beliefs about yourself, because as a child, you don't have the information to start to think through the logic of what's going on in your environment. So you start to build up your own stories, and you build up your own stories to make yourself feel safe. We start to roll into that, the assumptions, the attitudes, the rules of the society. And I mean, we do spend a lot of time working through untested assumptions. In other words, we think of things that are going through our head as being fact. So in other words, if we see it, feel it, understand it, we think it automatically is a fact. But a lot of times we're not really testing that. So we're building assumptions, we're accepting in ourselves that they're facts, and they remain totally untested. I mean, you only just have to be in a debate with a group of people and what have you. I mean, most people will present their thoughts as a fact. They don't necessarily present their thoughts as, this is just an idea I'm throwing through. And especially when you start to get in a heated argument, those assumptions start to really solidify as I'm presenting a fact. So in an open environment where you have a discussion, yes, it might be your assumptions might be presented that way, but certainly as it gets heated, we start to polarize, and our assumptions are always presented as facts. What we start to roll out then is coping strategies. The coping strategies are there to help us feel safe, to help us feel included. They protect us from the things we fear most. Then there's conversations, our interactions and what have you with the outside world, and we have automatic thoughts of the information that's being poured in, and we start to add meaning to those automatic thoughts based on coping strategies. Now, our coping strategies and triggers, and I guess this is where if you're looking for blind spots and things like that, what triggers you? And it's certainly one of the easiest ways to see what triggers some behavior, which if you looked at the outside would seem unreasonable. When you see someone else behave that way, you think, that seems a little excessive response to that. You only have to look at your very, very close relatives, family, sons, daughters, spouse, parents, and things like that, to kind of really see what triggers you. Because when you're in a very, very safe environment, your filter system for interactions with other people tends to be quite thin. So if you're looking for triggers and I guess behavior where you're running down a rabbit warren in an area it seems like an excessive reaction is usually a trigger. Now, some of these triggers can be quite damaging in terms of the relationship. Others are triggers that are just kind of silly. For example, I mean, people driving to work, they're running a little bit late. The light turns red, or the person in front is driving slowly. That can trigger some reaction. Stupid traffic lights, things like that, which where you're now throwing in metaphors, because the traffic lights can't be stupid because they're a machine. But you start to see that all the way through to someone actually giving you some kind of indication that your greatest fear that you're unlovable is actually true. They've seen through me, and then you get an excessive reaction to that where someone is trying to protect themselves. So we add meaning to automatic thoughts based on whatever coping strategy we have in place there to protect our very deepest inner feelings. We usually have an emotional reaction to that, and that may be a quickening of the heart rate, sweating of the palms, things like that. And then there's a physical response and an emotional response, and that usually lends out to behavior. Now, the behavior is not always good, bad, or indifferent. And I'm not sort of saying that this always leads to negative behavior, and it can lead to positive behavior. But I guess recognizing that no matter what that behavior is, even if it's very Mary Teresa, like, if you map back that through, it will come back to some core beliefs and life history and I guess experiences that have led that to be very, very, very benevolent behavior. So we see benevolent behavior, we see negative behavior, but it all comes from something going on underneath the surface. So as I was saying before, cognitive behavior, it just starts with these core beliefs. And I don't tend to use these in coaching, because as soon as you throw these words up, they're very final. They're very kind of, I guess, even just the words almost start to trigger some feeling. I'm not helpless, I'm not unlovable, I'm not unworthy, but they're not meant for that. They really are just sort of saying, well, core beliefs tend to fall into these three areas here, and we manifest them in different ways. I guess David Rock came up with a very, very nice model, which I've included here, and said, well, from my research, when these things are triggered, it usually relates to one of these 5 areas, So, and this is very important if you're in a leadership role, if you're thinking of doing some change management, even your interactions with people at your local sporting club or social club or anything like that. Understanding that these are the social threats, and they have a reward basis as well. So they are a threat, but you can then also add them as a reward, because the reward is not only that for them, it is also the reaction they will have to that. And this is where you can start to work the psychology of change for yourself. So if people have a need to feel status, if you threaten that status, you're going to get a negative reaction to that. But at the same time, if you recognize that status, you're likely to get a positive reaction to that. So if someone wants to be the president of that football club, if you then threaten them in that area there, then you're going to get a reaction to that. If you praise them in that, then you're going to get a better reaction to that. Some people, it's about certainty. They need to feel that they are in control of events, people, and situations moving forward. So once again, if you have someone who is looking and uncertainty is a trigger for them, if you create uncertainty, then you're going to expect a negative result. If you are providing certainty, you're going to get a better result. Autonomy is the same. How much you're in control of yourself, you're related, you're concerned with the qualities of the relationships you have with people, and fairness, your sense of justice, right and wrong in the world. Now, I guess if you have a look at yourself and have a look at what kind of makes you, a little bit, your heart beat a little bit faster, or the palms sweat a little bit, or something that triggers a behavior, it may relate to one of these things. I mean, and if I look at myself and I deal with talking to my 16-year-old son, I put a lot of effort into, and I help him be the best he can around the house. And when he doesn't contribute, taking the bins out, things like that, I think to myself, that's unfair. And it can, if I'm not careful and I get caught at a weak moment, I can snap at him about that. So it may not seem like a big thing, but he's triggering an unfairness threat to me. If someone is changing plans continuously, for me personally, I like to know. I like to know what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 days. I like to plan my week. I like to plan my activities. I like to set that out, because that's what works for me. When someone comes in and tips all that up, then I'm likely to have a reaction to that. And if that person is very, very close to me and starts to tip that up, then they're going to get a stronger reaction to me if I don't recognize it. And that's where we're moving to on this, is really sort of saying, well, knowing that this is the world we're operating, and knowing that these are the models, the way people move forward and think about things, if you can reflect that back in yourself and understand where you are, then you can then shine that light back on others. But you must start with yourself. So ladder of influence is another interesting model, and it's working on the same thing. there is something that happens, and it's real data experience what really happens. So you observe something, and it may just be a statement someone makes and what have you. Almost the second that statement is made, we straight away switch from actual reality to our filtered perceived reality. So we see an event and we immediately start to filter that event. Sometimes we actually completely change the event. I mean, they're at the point now in courts and what have you, where they in stressful situations, they're just not relying on eyewitness statements anymore, because a witness sees something, a witness to an event may see something completely different to someone standing right next to them. And, you know, it's all just because we are building it on the basis of our filters. So we have that filter that goes through, then we fix meaning to that. Is this a threat or a benefit to me? We start to make assumptions about it, what we know, what others' motivations are and things like that. And we draw a conclusion from it. Then we reinforce that and we form new beliefs. So we are looking for things that confirm what we believe. The traffic lights are always against me. Look at that. There it is. It's red again. Traffic is always terrible this time in the morning. Look, I'm just looking for it. And even if traffic was smooth, you ignore that. And if you're starting to build an argument with somebody, especially if someone's close to you, you see how you start to leave out some of the positive, the things that don't support your argument, and you very, very quickly tune into the things that do support your argument. And I guess at the top of that ladder, we actually, in the end of it, take action on the basis of that. So if you're walking down the street and you see someone staggering and fall over, I mean, that's just a real event, a real experience. It's what's really happening. What happens next is where your filter system goes. So how was that person dressed? What was their behavior looking like? What's your experience in the area? What's your own sense of the society and the community and what have you? And that will then I guess, drive the next stage of that. Now, do you go over and help that person, or do you ignore that person? Do you think that person is just drunk at this time of the morning because that's your previous experience, or this person has genuinely had some kind of medical issue and needs your help? And as I say, if I get involved, you might have some fears about, well, if I get involved, then I'm going to get caught up with the police, I'm going to get caught up in insurance, I could get caught up in the court. You know, we all start to build. So at the end of it, when you see someone fall over, you will take action based on the filter system you've put in place. So we all have somewhere between 60 and 70,000 thoughts per day, and 90% of them are all the same. But interestingly enough, in the English language, there's approximately 3,000 words that describe emotions. But there are nearly twice as many words for negative emotions as there are for positive emotions. And the research has shown that 70% of people tend to focus on negative emotions more frequently. And every time we react emotionally to a situation in our life, we create a chemical change in our body. And that chemical change in our body, so if you think back on the things you remember most clearly right through your life, and I'm saying you remember them absolutely like a camera or video might remember it. There's certainly, you will remember those. They are where something has occurred, a reaction has occurred where you have an emotional input to it, and that changes the chemistry in your body. It changes the chemistry in your brain, which starts to lock that in. So it's a pleasurable emotion, it'll lock it in. It's a very negative emotion, it'll lock it in. And what that does to lock it in is when anything that looks anything remotely like it happens again moving forward, your brain will automatically lock in to say, right, we're going through this again. And that chemical change in the body that has occurred at that point will start to where you get a physical and then a mental reaction to that situation. Now, you may have had a situation where you're very, very young, where it's almost a one-off, but it has such a strong impact on you that moving forward in your life, that anything that even remotely looks like that, you're going to get a reaction to, and you start to roll out your protection mechanism. So Daniel Kahneman, I really recommend you read this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman. It's an excellent book, and I mean, this doesn't give the book any of the credit it deserves. It's a very, very quick synopsis of it. But basically, you have two systems working in your brain. They're constantly fighting for control of your behavior and actions. In many ways, this leads to errors in judgment, memory, and decisions. So the two systems there, you have an automatic and impulsive system. As I was saying before, your brain is continually gathering information that's going around, supporting the things that you believe, rejecting the things that don't align with what you believe. And that is all based on an entire history, starting from ground zero of all your experience of interactions and what have you. Now that sets us well. As animals, we need that automatic and impulse system. We need that to protect ourselves. But the other part about it is when the brain is in thinking mode, it uses an enormous amount of calories. So our body is already attuned to try and minimize the number of calories used. I go cycling, and I always laugh to myself about it, where I could do a 100-kilometer ride through the hills and get back 4 hours on the bike and what have you, and I check the calories that I've used, and it equals probably 1 chocolate bar. And I'm thinking, wow, how amazingly efficient is my body that just 1 chocolate bar he's fed me for the calories to ride 100 kilometers through the hills. So we are automatically doing those kind of things. But the other part of it, which is what makes us human, is our ability to think. And that is system 2, where we're consciously aware and considerate, and we're continually, we are able to solve problems. We're able to think through things. We're able to consider our actions, and that is a very, very human trait, and what makes us, I guess, the primary creature on this earth. But our brain is lazy. Thus, we tend to switch to system 1. I mean, Daniel Kahneman gives a wonderful example. He went to the absolute top statistic class at Harvard Business School, and he presented a problem. And one of these kind of funny problems, and you've probably seen them before, where the obvious answer is very clear, but if you did the maths, the opposite is true. So he presented one of these problems to this top statistic class, and because the answer was obvious, a very, very small percentage of people actually worked it through. So you got the top statistic class understanding that working through will give you the right answer, because the obvious answer was so obvious. Only 10% of that group actually worked out that the obvious answer wasn't the correct one. So we are continually making these errors in judgment and decisions and what have you. And I guess it's that we can't stop and think through everything. So to a certain point, our automatic and impulsive responses are what keep us going day to day. Otherwise, we'll end up mental wrecks. But the other stage of it, we do have the capacity to stop, check, and think. So that's the question, I guess. How do you differentiate where you can and can't trust your gut feeling to act in a more mindful and make better decisions? And one of those key things is changing your mind, changing the way you think about the situations that you're facing on a day-to-day basis, especially where they're impacting you in some way. So what got us here won't get us there. It's by Goldsmith, one of the very famous coaches, and Albert Einstein. I don't actually believe Albert Einstein said this, but I mean, I'm going to attribute it to him because everyone else does. But insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And that comes down to our behavior. If I'm going to react, if I'm triggered in this way, if I'm reacting in this way, if this is my response, if these are stories I'm telling myself, then I'm really acting and doing the same thing over and over again, but hoping my life is going to get better as a result of that. And that is the definition of insanity. So when I'm coaching, I'm talking to people about things. I mean, if you have behaviors and triggers, and I guess someone that you may know, who you find that they lose their temper, and they suddenly lose that. And what you see is a behavior, and you see this extreme behavior at 100%, which is on the right-hand side of the screen there. That's generally not where this behavior starts. No one is, I mean, it may accelerate quickly, but it usually starts with something else. And what I would encourage you, if you starting to think about, okay, I want to change the way I'm reacting in the world. I want to change and get a better result out of my interactions, my social interactions, even the success I crave in my career. is go back and have a look at some of these triggers. If someone has a reputation, and this is where you're asking that, of losing their temper, go back and say, okay, what's going on back at the beginning there? And usually you will go back and you will find there is some trigger there that starts with a body sensation. So I coach a fellow, he goes into meetings. Now, at some point in that meeting, he will lose his temper. So we were called in, because he's a very, very intelligent guy, we were called in to moderate his behavior. So we're talking about something right at the very top there. And when you talk to him about it, I mean, he already knows, right at the very beginning, he is called to a meeting on an area where he knows there's an issue. He is already, his heartbeat is starting to go up, and his palms are starting to sweat a little bit. He already knows, I'm going into a meeting where it may possibly go wrong. Now his feelings are starting to go in. I don't want to be here. This is going to upset me. This is going to be a problem. They're going to say something that's going to trigger me off. Then the thoughts start to come in. And now he's starting to listen to the things that agree with his feelings and his body sensation, and ignore the things that aren't. Now, on that acceleration, at some point, his thoughts are going to trigger his behavior, because he's going to filter something, and something is going to trigger him off. And then what you see at the end of that is him, bang. So my question to him is, well, let's go back to the beginning and have a look where this cycle starts, because he doesn't go in completely neutral and calm into that meeting with no preconceived ideas, and they just suddenly lose his temper. And the facts are that, yes, we mapped it back. I mean, he is starting to feel the issues and what have you way back, long before he gets in that meeting. Coaching another senior executive, and the same kind of thing. He has a feeling of being overwhelmed. And that starts, with his day, the emails start coming in, a couple of problems start to pop up, priorities are getting in the way, things are becoming urgent and what have you. And his automatic behavior, that is, I need to deal with all that. So he spoke about, my bucket gets full. Then he starts to get these feelings of being overwhelmed. Then he starts to get these the thoughts about, well, how do I protect myself from this environment? And then his behavior at the end of that becomes dysfunctional, because he takes control, barks orders, disengages with people that should be there to help him. So once again, mapping back there and saying, okay, where does this all start? And I guess knowing where you can see those changes starting, and how do you start to change that? And for him, it was interesting. I actually bought him a little red bucket, and I said, you need to hang that bucket on your computer, and when you see your bucket starting to fill up, that is a point to do something about it. That's a point where you need to be handing out jobs for other people to do, because his triggers are when everything starts to get on, I'll put everything in my bucket. So it was a very good, mental trigger for him to start to deal with this, so that it never gets to the point where that behavior is dysfunctional and suboptimal in his interactions with other people. The previous fellow we were talking about, his trigger was really around unfairness. So he actually now carries a little bit of a mental model of, there's a very, very funny video about rhesus monkeys. You can look that up if you like. It's quite amusing. But when he feels that those thoughts of unfairness, which is going to drive to him losing his temper, he winds that back and thinks about the rhesus monkey spitting the dummy, and it settles him back to that. So you're talking about these visual and mental cues to manage that behavior. So, I mean, Tony Robbins did a lot of work in this. I really encourage you to research and think about what he's proposing, but really to think about a different situation. Why not start by describing it differently? I mean, driving in heavy traffic when you're running late and things like that, if you are using words like silly drivers, and this is slowing me down, I'm going to be late, and the traffic lights are useless, and why is it this way? You're not really adding value, because it doesn't make any difference to the traffic lights or the traffic. But if you want to think about that situation differently, you need to describe it differently. And that vocabulary, the words we employ to describe the experiences, are the way we actually define that experience. So if you can change your vocabulary and change the way you talk about that, you can start to manage your emotions. And the secret is to reverse it. Use strong words for positive emotions and less intense words for negative emotions. So the words you habitually choose to use affect how you communicate with yourself and therefore your experience. So, you know, saying things like, I can't do this, it's too hard, I don't enjoy it, things like that are not adding value to you in any way. In fact, you're really, you're usually your hardest critic, and you're usually the person that's talking yourself out of things. I mean, certainly for me, I cycle a little bit. No one likes hills, no one likes wind. But I find very honestly that how I describe my situation when I'm riding up a hill, I start to think about, I love hills. Hills make me strong. Hills make me fast. Hills make me a better cyclist. And I start to use those words rather than, oh man, I don't want to be here. What am I doing? I must have been out of my mind to get out at 6 o'clock in the morning to be riding up this hill. This is hurting. I mean, just the way I talk to myself about it changes the way I approach that situation. So simply by changing your habitual vocabulary is a really good start at describing those emotions where you can change the way you think about things. So it's that assemblage of words you're using that creates a state that disempower you. If you replace those words that empower you, then you're on your path to a much life free of encumbrances that you are putting on yourself. So here's a little exercise for you. Try writing down 3 disempowering words that you use that make you feel bad, and use 3 to describe new ones, and try and interrupt those patterns. And if we go back to what I was talking about at the beginning, it's, well, do I recognize this? Who am I? What triggers me? What are the things that I feel like I get upset about? Because you use the vocabulary to reinforce the way you're feeling about things, because it starts with your needs. It starts with the way you're feeling, and the thoughts reinforce that if you allow them to do that. But how you can feel, and you can change the way you feel about things by describing it differently. Metaphors are another thing. I mean, we use metaphors all the time. You know, I felt like a deer in the headlights. If you using those, the trouble and strife, or the anchor which the guys used to describe their wives, and the verse of the way women describe their husbands and things like that, they all things that are disempowering, and they're poor descriptors of relationships and interactions. You go into the school meeting and think, here we go again, someone's going to dominate this, and it's going to get boring, and it's going to, you're already pre-setting yourself up to follow patterns that ultimately, going into that, is not going to add value to the situation. In fact, it's going to make it miserable for you. It's going to disempower your interactions with that group of people, and it's certainly not adding more value to the larger groups. So creating more powerful, empowering metaphors are another way of changing the way you describe the situation in, and therefore it's starting to impact on the way you feel about that. And ultimately, changing that starts to flow back down to being, because if I feel positive reinforcement, then it starts to flow down to the way I'm thinking about things, the way I'm feeling about things, and ultimately what my needs are. And we do end up with those changes. So successful people, they understand themselves and how their behavior affects others. They understand their reactions to other people. They know how to maximize on what they do well. They have a healthy attitude about themselves, and they know how to adapt their behavior. And I guess, when I'm looking at people, I see people who've got a very, very big ego. I see this balance. I see a balance between high ego to low self-esteem. When I see high self-esteem, I see low ego. And an ego is your protection mechanism. And we all need a certain amount of ego. It's not to get rid of it, but I'm sure you all see and know people where the ego is running away with themselves a little bit too much. I look at those people and think, okay, where are your self-esteem issues here? Okay, you are putting on the front because you've got something to hide. People who don't have anything to hide don't put on the front. So it's not to say ego is bad, But when you're looking at yourself and then reflecting back on other people, you start to understand where people are coming from. And that can be a very, very powerful tool. Okay, so reframing your thoughts in a quick summary. And I recognize that, we're doing a half-hour, 40-minute quick presentation on this. It is a complex, and it's not that easy to do that. So I would suggest you just start with something quite basic. Think of and engage someone else around the place. So, in our household, we have certain phrases and what have you, which are just banned. So if someone brings up that phrase, anyone else in the family will say, we don't say those things here. And I mean, that lasted about a week, and that it's never come up again. But the nice thing about it is, even though it starts off as a blind spot, or someone says a phrase that we want to get rid of in the household, we start with something small, we recognize it, we point out when other people are doing it, which is pointing out their blind spots. We practice avoiding it and using different terms to phrase that. Within a week or so, it's wiped off the earth in our minds. So do you understand and recognize your triggers? Look in those early warning signs where you start to feel it building up. That's at the point where you're being triggered, and that's the point where you need to reframe how you're describing the situation, because as I feel those triggers build, I start to gather and look for things that support it. I ignore the things that fly in the face of it. Select something as a trigger grows. Think about your breathing, your posture, because we react to things and other people see that reaction. Redirect your response using constructive words and constructive behaviors, and start to build those new habits. Focus on whatever that change is. And then, as I say, I suggest you start with something small. If you've got some bigger things you need to address quickly, then I would really suggest you look at getting a coach to help you through these things. It's certainly something that Career Life Transitions offers. So in summary, to change your mind, you must become conscious of your unconscious thoughts, actions, and emotions. And it's not that hard. I mean, talk to your friends and your family and things like that. They're the ones that are going to trigger. They're the ones that are probably most likely going to provide you with that feedback. Or you can go out, there's a multi-view psychometric testing and what have you out there where you can go and do these tests and get some feedback on it. I like to kind of, as soon as something kicks off, use a phrase statement to quickly reframe, and I've written stop it there because there's a very, very amusing video. If you just look up stop it, look at your LinkedIn, it's a comedian in the US. It's a very, very funny interaction between a psychologist and a patient. Use mental rehearsals. If you start to understand what your triggers are, then mentally rehearse how you're going to react to that differently, because it won't lock in. It's going to take some practice. It's going to take some time. Change your metaphors, change your descriptive language, and put the time and effort in to make that happen, and engage and ask other people to help you. So it is possible to change your emotions about an event. It's possible to change your views on something. It's possible to change how you see any kind of interaction, whether you're working in the office or anything like that, or your social groups and what have you. But that change starts with you. And once you start to change, then your physical manifestation will be different to those around you. Your attitude will be different to those around you, and that will be contagious. And that's about the best you can do to manage the emotions of other people around you. But it starts with you. And Mel, I think on that note, that brings us to the end of our presentation.
Thanks, Peter. I hope everyone found that valuable. We do have a couple of questions that people have asked. So Rashika
Sure.
has said, what would be good empowering words to replace disempowering words?
Well, it can be quite as simple as I can't do this. And an empowering word, I can do this. And as I say, it really can be quite as simple as just the absolute reverse of what is disempowering you, This is too hard. No, this is easy. I hate doing this. No, I love doing this. And it's just the words. Even if that's not your immediate sense of it, that's, I guess, where you're just moving forward. So I could say, I'm riding up a hill. My body is saying, I hate this, but my mind is saying, no, I love this. And, you know, after a while, what I'm saying to myself is impacting how I'm feeling about it. Now, I might bring it to neutral, and that's all I'm looking to do with that. So, but it's not just, don't think it's going to change your feeling about it, but do have the faith that if you change your thoughts about it, that it will flow down.
Thanks, Peter. Another really interesting question that we had was from Christopher, and he says that he'd be interested in hearing about how common imposter syndrome is amongst new managers and what psychological tools are available to help people live up to the jobs they have found themselves in. Really interesting question.
Yeah, imposter syndrome, it's kind of an interesting one. I think people are advancing very, very quickly. Certainly, if you go back a number of years ago, they always talk about, you know, growing into a business and working your way up. I guess that's what it was. These days, fantastic education. People are coming through and they're finding themselves in quite senior roles very, very quickly, and then looking back and thinking, oh my goodness, you know, I'm not quite feeling safe here with that. And I guess that whole thing then just starts to go back and say, okay, what are your underlying, because imposter syndrome is just a trigger. It's a trigger reaction to some core belief you have about yourself. So the fact that someone else sees that you can do the job and has put you in there, and you're now seeing this saying, I don't believe I can. Really, I would say is a matter of then going back and saying, okay, what is the underlying drivers to this? What am I telling myself about this that is an untested assumption? Because I mean, it tends to be your own assessment is an untested assumption in imposter syndrome. So, I mean, other people see that value in you. And then, as I say, we start to took that where their ego, because imposter syndrome is an attachment to the ego, which is in counterbalance to your self-esteem. So it's, I guess, going back and having a look at that and getting some coaching back at the beginning and say, okay, what core beliefs and untested assumptions you're applying to this that makes you think you're not worthy for this job, even though other people clearly think you are. And that's where we start to play little games where we look for things where we're failing and we don't recognize the things where we're successful.
Thanks, Peter. Another query we had was from Charles, and he mentions about overcoming the need for external validation, learning how to move apologetically and confidently.
Well, I guess, as I say, internal or external validation is once again a product of the ego. And with these things, when people are feeling that, that's when I'm automatically thinking, okay, if you recognize it, you've got a trail. I guess when you have blind spots and whatever, you don't recognize it, then someone else either needs to point that out to you, or you may just go through life where people avoid you on certain circumstances or just stay away from that subject. But I mean, if you're feeling that need for external validation, then straight away you've got a frame to work with and saying, okay, what is it? So start to define that. What is the external validation I'm looking for? Why do I need that external validation? What is being triggered at me and what is driving that trigger? So it really is kind of working that back and saying, okay, what do I need it for? What is the untested assumption here? What is the language I'm using internally? What am I thinking about this? And then starting to change that. I mean, I had a conversation with someone yesterday, and they made a statement and said, you know, it was actually around retirement. And the statement was, everyone says to me, you know, why are you still working? Why aren't you retired? And he saw that as a negative statement. But it was very, very easy just to reframe that and say, but that's a very positive statement. People are saying to you, why aren't you out enjoying life and you know, using this time to travel and what have you? Where his thought was that it's a negative, you know, you're taking up space in the office and, you know, you shouldn't be here. So just a little quick reframe there. And it's just amazing. His kind of eyes light up and thought, okay, yeah, I'll look at it that way. And even if people don't mean it that way, just take it that way. I mean, one of the, a friend of mine uses a very, very effective tool. It basically says, no matter what someone says to me, whether it's sarcastic or not, I'm going to thank them as if it was being positive. And it very, very quickly disarms people. But the other part about it, it's almost a shield for yourself. So if someone says, yeah, nice job, thank you very much. I really appreciate your input. You see what that says. So the comment, nice job, might be a sarcastic comment, but if you accept it as being positive with positive regard, that's adding value to you. And it negates, people will stop doing it.
Thanks, Peter. And one last one from Jody, who asked, I want to start my own business and work from home, but I always end up thinking that I can't do that.
I guess that comes back to what we were saying before. I can do that. Okay? It's the negative thoughts that come in there that may overwhelm you. And this is where a coach, getting your partner, family members, things like that, because we all go through moments of self-doubt. We're all not rushing through the world with positive regard to everything going on around the place. But I guess breaking something down to start your own business and starting to change the way you talk to yourself and break starting that business down in manageable blocks. So you start to see successes. Because if I look at the whole situation, it may seem overwhelming. But you know, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. If I can break that down and say, if I could do this today, and I can do this, do that, and then build it. I mean, when I train sports people I'm working with, when they come along to training, I tell them, you're not here to buy a house. What you're here to do is build a brick, and you take that brick home and you add that. And pretty soon you're going to have a beautiful house that you design, brick by brick by brick. You're not just buying someone else's house. So building up a business, it's building it brick by brick and recognizing that if I can make one brick, then I can make another brick, and I can do this. Thanks, Mel.
Thanks, Peter, and everyone for joining us this morning. There's been a few queries about the PowerPoint slide and also the link to this presentation and to previous presentations. So I will be sending that through to everyone, and all of our previous presentation videos are also located on our website. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope you found some value in today's Feed Your Mind, and stay tuned for next month.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.